Hey everybody, Jamie McLeod-Skinner here. I'm running to be Oregon's next Secretary of State, and I'm engaging Oregonians across our state in conversations to introduce candidates who are running and also make sure that voices are heard, including rural voices. I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by my good friend, Mary Middleton. Hey Mary, welcome.
Hi.
So Mary's running for the Oregon State, to be a state representative for House District 4. So first of all, let's start out with, where is District 4?
Great question. So I live in Grants Pass, and District 4 is composed of parts of Josephine County and Jackson County. And it includes just a portion of Grants Pass, and it hugs the I-5 corridor between here and Medford, and includes all those small communities in between there. So Weimar, Rogue River, Gold Hill, Center Point, Eagle Point, and White City.
Nice. So a really important district in Southern Oregon and close to home for me. I'm an Ashland High graduate, so it's near and dear to my heart. So today's conversation is going to be about what's working, what's not working, and what does accountable government look like to Southern Oregon, specifically to your district. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Secretary of State's role too, and the partnerships that are part of that leadership. So let's start a little bit with our backgrounds. Also, if folks want to ask questions specifically, go ahead and type them into the question line, and we'll answer questions that either came in before or come in during this conversation. So first, a little bit about myself. Again, there's that Southern Oregon connection. I'm an Ashland High graduate. When I was a kid, my mom actually took a teaching job in Tanzania, so I spent a chunk of my childhood overseas, but returned to the States and moved to Southern Oregon. My professional background is in engineering and planning. And after getting those two degrees, I wanted to engage in public service. My mom's a retired public school teacher. And so I wanted to follow in her footsteps of serving my community, not taking the corporate route. And so I took a job with the International Rescue Committee. I had come out at a young age, and so the military was not an option back then, but worked for a humanitarian organization over in post-war Bosnia and Kosovo, repairing schools and hospitals. When I wanted to come back to the States, they liked the work I did in managing, and so they asked me to run their refugee resettlement office in the Bay Area. So I sometimes joke that I was Oregon's revenge of an Oregonian going to California, but worked with refugee community and immigrant communities in helping people become citizens, access their right to vote. Also worked in organizational development for the city of Sunnyvale, worked as a city planner for Sunnyvale, and then also as an environmental planner for a regional water agency, serving 2 million folks in urban and rural areas, making sure that people both had clean water, but also we were minimizing the impact on the environment. During that time, I also served on the Santa Clara City Council for 8 years, served on numerous regional committees on everything from natural resource to helping to protect our environment, to economic development, all these things that are key to making communities be healthy and strong. When I came home to Oregon, got a law degree from the U of O, focused on natural resource law, water law, and Indian law. Clerked for the Army Corps of Engineers and on the water case actually in Klamath, just over the hill from where I'd gone to school. And also a city manager down in Southern Oregon. Ran for Congress in 2018. My wife and I had moved to Central Oregon, although the second congressional district is Southern Central and Eastern Oregon. And now we live in Central Oregon. I'm a natural resource attorney and also an organizational business consultant, serve on the Jefferson County Education Service District Board, and also was appointed by the governor to serve on OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And let me throw it over to you, Mary. I know you've got a tremendous resume, but please share that with us.
Thank you, Jamie. You've got quite an impressive background and experience as well. I'm really grateful to be here today. Thank you so much for organizing this. It's awesome. So I grew up in the Midwest. I'm the fourth of 6 children. And usually when I do my stump speech, I tell a story about, being about 2.5 years old, and I could walk, but I wasn't too good on the stairs. And my mom had taken me in the house to put me down for a nap. She wanted me to take a nap, and I didn't want a nap. And so I just kept getting up, and she kept chasing after me. And we were living in a trailer, and I was the fourth of 6 children, and the oldest was 6 years old. So mom was really busy. and she was pregnant again. So I just kept getting up, and she kept trying to put me down, and we did that dance for a little while, and Mom got a little tired of it. And she said, my middle name is Anna. She said, "Marianne, I don't want to see you on those stairs." And there I was at the top of the stairs, and that my escape was in sight. And so my 2.5-year-old little brain thought about it. And I said, "Mama, turn your head." And I asked my mom to turn her head away because I didn't want to disobey my mother, but I also was determined to get out that door. And so I tell that story because I was born, I believe, with determination in my soul. And when I set out to do something, I want to finish that job. And pretty much almost everything that I've really set my sights on, I've accomplished. One of those things, I was the campaign manager several years ago for the genetically engineered plant ordinance here in Josephine County. And
we're going to talk about that. That's a huge thing.
And that job isn't done. And so that's something we can talk about later. But that's part of my experience. Also, I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching for more than 20 years. And I've taught across the curriculum. I actually moved out of the country for a little while to get experience teaching in other countries, to study education and study different cultures. My discipline that I enjoy teaching in is mathematics. So I'm a mathematician, and I have a master's degree in applied math and a bachelor's in math. And I really enjoy ensuring that everyone has access to education. I've seen firsthand the power that education has to change someone's life and really change it, turn it to something positive so that they can make a living for themselves and for their family and contribute to society in a positive way where they feel good about themselves. And so I really enjoy teaching at the community college level. I teach at Road Community College, and today I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not on behalf of the college, but I am proud to work at that college, and especially with, if we have time to talk about, what's going on there currently during COVID and how RCC has reacted to that. I also am vice chair on the Southern Oregon Education Service District. That's another thing we both have in common with the Education Service District. And what are those things about? That organization is all about access to education, right?
That's
providing education for everyone, right? I'm really proud of the way that SOESD, that's the acronym for that, that group has reacted to COVID as well, and provided hotspots throughout the region, so that Wi-Fi hotspots, so that folks can get online who don't necessarily have Wi-Fi at home, or in their, it's not really accessible in some rural areas. The Wi-Fi is pretty bad. And so with education going online, those were absolutely necessary. And I'll just briefly mention that I'm the chair of the Oregonians for Safe Farms and Families, OSFF, which is the organization that kind of is about protecting local farmers and is carrying the weight of protecting our farmers here locally. And I'm a past board member with Our Family Farms. It's out of Jackson County. So working together.
Nice. Well, and you've got this amazing background, and you've also been successful at moving things forward, which it's really exciting for me to kind of show off a friend of mine, a really remarkable person who's running for office, but also someone who has specifically won campaigns in rural communities. Progressive Democrat, a rural Democrat who's stepped up and worked together in partnership with folks in your community to move progressive legislation forward. And I want to talk about that a little bit, but let's actually start. I want to talk a little bit about our shared experience with education ESDs, what we're seeing right now, because that's really big because of COVID-19. But also just to say, I think we first met a handful of years ago, maybe, and I think it was around politics. I was running for Congress, and then also met you and your wife when we were talking about ag issues. We were talking specifically about genetically engineered crops, but also we're both Emerge Oregon graduates. And so we have that in common as well, that Emerge is a great organization that helps to train progressive women to be prepared for all just the nuts and bolts of how to run for office and how to engage in the political process with the ultimate purpose of making sure voices are heard, communities are served well. So I'm really proud of that background that both you and I have.
Thank you.
So let's talk about kind of what's working, what's not working from a rural democratic perspective. We talked about the distance learning piece and the fact that nationwide, globally, everyone's responding right now to COVID-19. You mentioned some of the distance learning things that you're doing with regards to the ESD. What are some of the things also that you're doing through the community college where you're a professor?
So at RCC, we are teaching online. We took almost every class. There were very few classes that were canceled, and not every community college in the state was able to do that. But we have a fantastic management crew, and management and faculty met together, and we talked about it. Okay, what are we going to do? Let's go online. What are the obstacles that we're going to see? Well, some people didn't have computers, and you know what? Management said, "Here you go. You got a computer at your desk. Take it home." Somebody said, "Well, I live in rural Oregon, and there's not, where I'm at, there's terrible internet, and I can't afford it. Here you go. We're going to buy this little portable hotspot for you. Here you go. Take it." The automotive department, they set up a whole video camera program in their garage, and he's still teaching automotive and doing all those lessons. The science department has just done cartwheels, bringing those labs to an online format. Just amazing work, and everybody has just reached out together. The technology department trained us all immediately because there were lots of people who'd never even utilized Blackboard or Zoom or any of those things. And they said, "Okay, well, we've got sessions. Here you go. Here's 20 sessions. Sign up for one, and we'll train you guys how to do that." And so everybody did, and we kept the classes online so that our students are going to get success. They're going to be able to finish their degrees and complete their programs and move on to the rest of their life, because this is not going to last forever. And and just looking at how can we get through this and provide success for as many people as possible. I was really proud with that. I was on a phone call with the Oregon Education Association, where they were talking to teachers throughout the whole state and some of the obstacles. And again, rural Oregon, having internet access, having computers, and there were some schools who didn't have the capability of handing those computers out to their teachers. And there were also schools who there's lots of students who don't have a computer at home, right? And what are those students doing? And so RCC, one of the things RCC did is keep the labs open while following social distancing protocols. So somebody goes into the lab, nobody's within 6 feet of them. Once they leave, there's a worker there, goes and cleans the whole area, and they're trained on how to do that. The local high school handed out laptops to kids, and there's so much of that happening that we're working together to make this be as best as we can.
Yeah, no, that's great. And what we're seeing here in Central Oregon is also our ESD really stepping up, having the resources to buy the hotspots. That's one of the things that we're struggling with, because we don't have some of those resources, and because things are so spread out, especially we have large lower income communities and folks that we serve. And so we've got, especially the Warm Springs Reservation, really remote areas. Some of our kids don't have access to the internet. And then, so it's, and also don't have some of those resources. And that's just been a real challenge here in Southern Oregon on the ESD side of it. But then also for the work that's happening at Rural Community College. That's really great to hear that there's been that stepping up and that partnership, that working together. I think of rural areas, and this is true in the metro area as well, in urban areas, but that sense of us both feeling really both independent, but also interdependent, and working together to be successful, which is really wonderful. I want to talk a little bit about your focus. I know that some of the things you're focused on are education, of course. Access is really big. Farms and business, bridging the divide, the things that I've been talking about a lot as well. Oh, one other point on the education piece, that kudos to the community college, is the fact that obviously once we're through this, and folks who have gone through the system, they're, the rebuilding our economy is going to be important. So making sure that they have still developed those skills and able to step into a rebuilding mode on the economy is going to be critically important. But I know that's important to you, bridging the divide, but also supporting the local economy and family farms. And this is something that often, I know it's work you've done before, and I want to ask you a bit about the measure that you worked on and you were successful in. But it's often, I think, people who are not in rural areas tend to think of, well, ag is a Republican issue, and there's not Dems who are engaged in rural farms and ag issues, and it's not the case whatsoever. But you're a perfect example of someone who's worked really closely on rural and on ag issues. Can you talk a bit about the work you did on the ban passing measure that's often considered very progressive, a ban to grow genetically engineered crops, and you did that in a very rural and arguably conservative area? How did you do that?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you so much for that, because it's something I'm really, really proud of. And it was absolutely a community-wide effort. And this is considered a conservative part of the state. In fact, it's sometimes considered one of the most conservative counties, Josephine County. And the one thing that was in our favor was that Jackson County and Josephine County were both passing ordinances at the same time. It came to our attention because of local farmers talking about genetically engineered crops growing in the area and the threat of pollen contamination. And so we got an initiative together and got it on the ballot. And then
this is just to jump in, this is a countywide initiative, right? For the
county-wide initiative. Yeah. So there was one in Josephine County and one in Jackson County together. And Southern Oregon, it's a very, very unique bioregion. It's called the banana belt of the state, I think, because we get a lot of sun here, and there's a lot of little pockets where farmers have like 5 to 12 acres, and they grow seeds, right? It's a premier seed growing region known throughout the nation to farmers and seed growers. And so if you contaminate the seed supply, then you're going to lose control of the seed supply, because genetically engineered crops are patented, and you would once seeds are contaminated, the farmer who's growing them no longer owns them. They're owned by the corporation. So anyway, we did a lot of letters to the editor. We ran that campaign. We won with 58% of the vote, which is a sound win in Josephine County. And we did it on $20,000. So absolutely everybody was who were part of the main team were all volunteers. We paid for some video stuff and some advertising and things like that, lawn signs like crazy, but mostly it was an LTE campaign. LTE campaign is like the number one thing, and canvassing, right? That's what we did. And it was bipartisan completely. There were Democrats and Republicans just working together. And we understood that, we probably weren't going to meet eye to eye on everything, but we were committed to this issue. So.
Yeah. And that's what I love so much about the partnerships we've built in rural parts of the state. And I think that's kind of the hurdle that I found when I'm in more urban areas, when there's an assumption that rural areas are just conservative, and also that there's such a split in terms of the opportunity to work together on policy issues. The one thing I love so much about your story is it's something that many strong progressive, hardcore progressive would say, hey, looking at genetically engineered crops, and also the big corporation aspect of it, having big corporations be able to step in and essentially claim ownership of local farms and crops. That's something that's a huge issue for progressive communities, but it's also a huge issue for Oregonians, period. I mean, you talk about the seed crop, that's true also. I mean, I think about up in the Willamette Valley for grass seed. I think of Central Oregon, where I am, just in the Madras area, the seed crop for carrots and all sorts of crops. And it's so this is something that's huge for our state as a whole and our economy and the sustainability of our economy. But it's also, there's so much overlap. And that's one of the things I think it's true also for climate change. I think we haven't been successful in engaging on that on the issue itself and having that conversation. And that's why I think some of our legislation keeps falling short. But some of these things that are seen as traditional kind of urban rural divides or Republican Democratic divide, it's not an either or. And your example of working together, because it's about local economies, it's about people's livelihoods.
Yeah.
If that's our focus, we can succeed in elections, we can win elections, and we can better serve communities. Because my frustration is, especially in Central Oregon, I think you and I were talking about this the other day, is the fact that we've got communities that are not being served, including those folks who are not Democrats, because our representatives are not serving the needs of our entire community.
That's right. They're not listening to the entire community, and they're just representing kind of the people they know, the people that maybe write them checks. I'm not sure. Yeah.
So what does accountable government look like to you? I mean, when you're talking about, we're talking about, I talk about a lot because I'm with regard to the Secretary of State's role. Accountable government for me means audits and making sure we're hearing people and making sure we're addressing needs, and not just making sure there's a paper trail. That's very important on financial audits, but there's also sustainability audits and equity audits and performance audits, information security audits, that we're really looking at making sure that government is accountable on all levels. But for your race and for your region and for some of the things that your community is facing, what does accountability look like? What's been missing?
So I believe that government should be transparent. It should put people first, not corporations. Keeping in mind, small businesses in every community are needed. Access to education and funding for community colleges. Last year, the Support Our Students Act went through, and it's wonderful for K through 12 education, but it left out community colleges.
Yeah.
And there had to be this sort of last minute scramble to find money in the budget to actually fund community colleges. And access to community colleges in rural communities especially provides access to people to get the training that they need to get a job, right?
Yeah.
Not every student, not every person who graduates from high school or gets a GED wants to go to 4-year university. And
That's
community
right.
colleges provide that other option, that technical training. And community colleges do an excellent job of doing that. And we absolutely need to fund them. And we've underfunded education in Oregon for decades.
Yeah. And I think that the Student Success Act was a great step forward. One of the things that I was disappointed at when I learned about was that it also included a tax break component. Why, all that money should have been focused on addressing the education needs of our community. The other thing that is part of the Secretary of State's role. So just to say, the Secretary of State is an executive management role that oversees over 200 employees and different divisions, elections, audits, corporations, the registration of businesses, and also the state archives. Also is the lieutenant governor and serves as the backstop for redistricting. So every 10 years when we redraw our political boundaries, that's the job of the legislature. But if the legislature walks out yet again, it becomes a responsibility of the Secretary of State. So making sure we have fair boundaries is a key part of that role. But looking at the corporations piece, one of the things that I've been talking about is looking to focus on those who are going through the trades, or those who are not going to take the old school traditional route of a 4-year college, but actually partner with vocational tech programs at high schools and also with community colleges to help people who want to start small businesses have those resources in place. Because a huge issue has been our rural economies.
Yet again, another connection between SOESD and community colleges. Those do that. They do that CTE, that career and technical education together. And it's a wonderful partnership.
Yeah, and your point of the importance and how vulnerable some of our rural economies can be, just because sometimes they'll just depend on 1 or 2 major businesses, and then if there's some issue with the market, then it can be decimating for local economies. So part of that is also internet access, so everyone has access to the information highway. But providing those resources and developing those partnerships is going to be, I think, really key. Another thing, when you were talking about transparency, I know that you had mentioned something about access to meetings in Salem, and hopefully post COVID-19, once we get access to resources and internet access, maybe more people can engage and don't have to just be kind of inside the Capitol building to actually engage and have their voices heard, because that comes down to privilege. Who can be there at that time, or who can pay
could be
someone to be
there
there on their behalf.
Tuesday at 11?
Yeah, yeah.
Who can come to this? We're going to have this meeting. It's open to everybody Tuesday at 11. Well, if you live 4 hours or 5 hours away, first of all, you got to get up really early in the morning and get yourself on the road. And also, you have to take off work, right? Like, what about working people, right? In rural Oregon, some of us are retired, but not all of us.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, and so one of the things I've really appreciated also, the sense of access and transparency. Transparency isn't just, well, if you show up, I'll show you the books. It's a matter of how can I, if I don't have the resources to show up, how can I still access it? And that's a huge issue once you're outside, the kind of the bubble of the Capitol.
Right.
I really appreciate that, because again, transparency is typically, well, it's often, Democrats talk about it as an important issue, but there are a lot of rural areas who then don't have access to that transparency if that linkage is not made. And so that's something I also greatly appreciate about what you've been talking about. Just again, to tie in to the different aspects of both local and regional, but also statewide, is some of the election component of the Secretary of State's role. So working closely with folks throughout our state on election security, making sure our systems are safe, and election integrity, making sure more voices are heard and people get access to their right to vote. The other piece is through the audit process, both what we're gonna audit, how we audit those different types of audits to make sure that government is accountable. And then also something I've been talking about is proposing key performance measures, KPMs, to the state agency. So as a result of audits, coming up with recommendations on how those agencies can be evaluated on an annual basis by the legislature to make sure we incorporate some of the things that we're missing. Let me see, what are some of the, well, actually, let me just jump down to questions right now, because we've got a bunch of questions came in. So how can an audit of a state agency result in an actual change? Oh, I just kind of touched on that. So there's two things with that. One is daylighting. So if you go through an audit process, what you're doing is you're looking to identify what are the strengths of what's going on, what's working, and also what's not working. And so, as you roll it out, it's also really important, I think, to give credit to the hard work and the good work that's being done, but also identifying what needs to change and then working in partnership as the agency head develops a plan to actually make change. And then again, tied into that as well as, my experience before in working with audits and working in organizational development was in change management. And so you look at not just counting widgets, but you look at the change you're actually trying to make. And that's that end result, that's that results-based type of analysis. And so, and looking, and then I mentioned the key performance measures. So every year when state agencies go before the legislature, their report card, in a sense, is based on their key performance measures, their KPMs. And so if that report card, those KPMs, don't actually measure the impact that is needed from that agency to serve Oregonians well, I would propose new KPMs that actually get to that point, what needs to get done, and propose that to legislature to adopt for those agencies. Because it's typical, we perform what we're graded on, we'll perform what we're measured on. And so by establishing those measures, it allows agencies to be more engaged. It also allows to daylight issues. We touched on, or you mentioned the community college not getting access to some of the resources. But even when resources were allocated, sometimes, and especially resources for frontline staff, for classroom, sometimes they've been allocated to paying a high paid administrator, bringing in more administrators, as opposed to providing relief in the classroom. It's similar to even looking at education in our K through 12 system about impacts on the classroom and class size. This has been a huge issue for virtually every educator I've spoken to, and my mom's a retired teacher. The impact of class size is a health and safety issue, a health and safety impact on our educators and on our kids. And so using that lens, that health and safety lens, as part of an audit of our education system, it gets it away from just the buzzword of class size, which the legislature doesn't want to talk about because it's a sticky and a controversial issue. Okay, forget about that buzzword. Let's just talk about the health and safety of our kids and educators.
Perfect.
That's the kind of thing we could do through a different type of audit and a different approach to audits. There's a question about healthcare, making sure all Oregonians have access to healthcare. I mean, what are some of the things that you focused on? Again, for the Secretary of State, it would be a focus on looking at through the audit process, what's working, what is not working. But specifically from your take, I know this is an issue that's near and dear to your heart as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen across the nation, folks in marginalized communities who don't have access to healthcare have been hit really hard with COVID-19, and the numbers are staggering, right? It's just absolutely outrageous. And so we absolutely need to focus on having access to healthcare, and not just access to healthcare, access to affordable healthcare. I mean, adjunct faculty, for example, at community colleges and universities as well, right? Oftentimes they're offered a healthcare option that's half their pay, and they can't afford that, right? That's not affordable healthcare. So we need to address this as a nation. We need to address it as a state. We need to address it in all of our communities, and in rural communities. We talk about food deserts. There are also healthcare deserts where there's just not affordable healthcare available, and there's those communities, unfortunately, are getting hit really hard right now.
Yeah, well, and especially in rural communities, this impacts women's health, especially in rural areas where we talk about it. We have these good ideas statewide, but if the resources aren't there and the support isn't there and the services aren't there, they're not being provided. It doesn't matter what kind of good language and good policies and good ideas come out of Salem, or out of the capital. If it's not actually impacting people's lives, there's a void. And that's where I think having more rural Democrats in leadership, in elected office, in Salem specifically, in the capital, is really critically important to making sure that it's not just talking about, okay, it's fine if some Oregonians are served. We really need to pull out and make sure that all Oregonians are served on so many of these really key things for healthcare. Another question, Emily wants to know, what are some ways that folks can help on your campaigns in this final month? Thanks, Emily. Great question. So Mary, why don't you share some of your thoughts and some of your asks?
Well, my campaign had to just sort of, like everybody's campaign, right? We had to, okay, let's shift gears, because I was all ready to focus on canvassing. So right now I'm focusing on phone banking, and I could still use volunteers to help me with that. I really want to get out the vote. I'm running unopposed in the primary, but I will not be running unopposed in November. By the way, we didn't mention it earlier, but this will be the first time that the incumbent will see an opponent since 2014. So the first time in many, many years that the voters of District 4 get a choice when it comes to that. And so folks can volunteer with my campaign with my website at electmary2020.com or friendsofmarymiddleton.org. Both of those are the same website. And click on there and you can sign up to help volunteer. And hopefully at some point we'll be able to canvass again before November. And we need house parties. We need to spread the word about my campaign, and just all those things.
Super. And I actually am in a contested primary, so I'm facing ballots dropping in about a week and a half, and the primary is May 19th. Encouraging folks to check their registration at sos.oregon.gov by April 28th. You need to be registered as a Democrat to be able to vote for me in the primary. I know some folks are very proud of their independent status, and actually, if you're not registered as a Democrat, are non-affiliated or an independent, you can actually also vote for me on the independent. I'm also listed as a candidate to potentially receive that cross nomination, but would greatly appreciate folks your support for this race. Like Mary, we're doing phone calls. We've also got lawn signs if people want to put out lawn signs. I know a lot of folks have some from 2018. And so we actually have, you still got no lawn sign or even banner, we can send you a little, it's almost like duct tape you put over that just says Secretary of State. It covers the for Congress. And so all the one behind me actually is exactly that. That's an old lawn sign from 2018, and we just had the duct tape we put over it. So it's recycling, but it's also utilizing the resources we have. You can get access to that information on my website at jamiefororegon.com. Also on social media, Jamie McLeod-Skinner for Oregon. We have information there as well. And so, yeah, calls, and if folks are able to contribute as well, so we can help get the word out. And then just contacting folks in your neighborhood, sharing our information that we have online on our Facebook page is really helpful. I've been trying to do is really show how I will be a Secretary of State, not just talking about these ideas, but helping to promote candidates similar to this conversation now to our folks statewide, so people can get a sense of what it's like to have that rural Democrat perspective, and then also get to introduce some really great folks like Mary who are running statewide. So that's been fun. We're also have an Oregon Voices Roundtable where we're talking about issues, what needs to be heard, what needs to change. That is a perspective that it comes from many different communities. So the Latinx community, the Native American community, the communities of color, as well as the LGBTQ community and the business community. So we're doing some of that work. Another question that came up is from Dave, Jamie, as Secretary of State, how can you impact the no GMO? Well, if a ballot measure were to come forward on a statewide level, that would be something that I would be come through my office as Secretary of State, and we would be reviewing that language and putting that process in place. Mary, the ballot measure you talked about you mentioned was county specific, both in Josephine and Jackson County, but whether something came through overall. Also, if something is not being implemented and not being addressed, and something was legally passed by voters, then I could have a role in stepping in and pushing to make sure that there was enforcement. I know in this specific case, there's been some challenges and some issues within the legislature and some overlooking of the needs of rural Oregonians on this specific measure. So I would be an advocate for making sure that was addressed and the needs and the voices of voters were truly heard, which although you were successful in passing it, it has not gone through yet. And you haven't had a champion in the legislature to step up and help to make that happen. And I know you would be the champion for your community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then lastly, what are some tips for listening in politics? And this is something we talk about a lot, actually, as rural Democrats. What would you say, Mary? What are some ideas?
Tips for listening. Listen, hear what's said, and try to put yourself in that person's position. Ask questions. Where are you coming from? I talked to my neighbor who's frustrated with the fact that he applied for small business loan help with the feds, and he's not heard anything. And he applied the day it was open, and he's not heard anything back on that money. And he has about 5 employees, and all of them they can't work, and there's just no money coming in. And so at some point they're going to be in the free food line, and all of our food banks are just overwhelmed with very, very, very similar situations. There was another story I was going to tell. The local Boys and Girls Club were instrumental in handing out school lunches to students who would normally get the free lunch. And they also wanted to coordinate efforts with having the free food bank at the same location, because oftentimes those people were the same people, and the federal regulations did not allow them to do that in the same place. So what that created was people standing in line, right, waiting for the free lunch, and then having to go to another location and stand in line and wait for their food. And it just was like, hey, we got to work together. We got to collaborate. Let's find common solutions for all of us, and not, separate because of some rule that doesn't work in our community. So
Yeah, asking for common sense. That's
ah,
part of that. What's missing at
oh,
times, and it's so frustrating. And the
yeah,
other thing too, I'm really proud of it, rural communities. And you just mentioned we have so many of these organizations who step up and who really work to serve everyone. And politics isn't a part of it. When you focus on our families and communities first, it that's what brings us together. That's that commonality. So real specific to the question, I think your point, Mary, of listening first and trying not to jump in and argue and judge where someone's at, but really sometimes it's also frustrating because you have someone who has a very different perspective than you or who's in the attack mode. And I've had this many a times. And so what I always try to do is just find something in common and just listen to find something in common and start there and build
mhm,
from there.
yeah,
And then realize we're not going to agree on everything, and that's okay. But
mhm,
also, if we have the focus of the needs of our families and our communities, that usually is a really good starting point because that's that common ground piece. Um, and then also, have the bigger picture in mind. And this is true between parties and also within parties as well. What's that bigger goal that we're trying to accomplish? And
yeah,
sometimes it's frustrating. I can tell you. I mean, I've been in elected office for 9 years in urban and rural areas, and
mm,
it meant much of that time was politically in the minority. And it, if we really are focused on trying to accomplish something, this larger goal, and really serving community, it means we have to find a way to work with others to get it done. It doesn't mean we give up on our values. We can be very passionate about our values. And sometimes it's just the language we use. I've found that in talking about the ideas rather than using buzzwords allows people to say, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, as opposed to, I mean, I've seen this on talking about climate issues around the state where some folks say, I don't believe in climate change, but I'm really concerned about the flooding and the drought and the wildfires. So we start there and we have that
right,
conversation.
right.
Um, but anyway, thank you so much for your time. We've actually run past time. Thank you so much for your time, Mary. And also, thanks all of you who have joined us. Really proud of my friend and colleague, Mary Middleton, who's running in Southern Oregon. And give us one more time, Mary, give us your website again, please, and your Facebook page.
So my website is electmary2020.com, and my Facebook page is Mary Middleton for Oregon State Representative. And I just want to ditto, Jamie, how proud I am to know you, and I'm with you all the way. I think you make an excellent Secretary of State. You've got my vote.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. And my website is jamiefororegon.com. Jamie McLeod-Skinner for Oregon on our social media. We have some of these ongoing conversations, so please look out for them. We also have information on COVID-19 on our webpage, actually links to other resources, both safety, mental and physical health, and also economic support for local communities. Thanks everyone for joining us. Stay safe during this pandemic, and we're going to get through this together.
Yes.